You have to understand, the Vaantheon never hated us. Hate is a messy, illogical thing. It requires passion. The Vaantheon didn't possess passion. They possessed crystalline certainty and a logic so pure it was a form of blindness. They conquered Earth not with plasma cannons but with a sigh of disappointment. They looked at our art, our wars, our chaotic societies, and our ridiculous, fragile emotions, and they pitied us. They saw children playing with fire in a house of priceless artifacts, and so they calmly extinguished the flames, took the matches away, and gave us a new, simpler purpose: to serve. For 100 years, that was our story. We were the custodians of their empire. The janitors. The mechanics who tended to the vast, silent machinery of their civilization. On thousands of worlds, from the core systems to the outer rim garrisons, the sight of a human in a gray utility jumpsuit was as common and as overlooked as a cleaning drone. We were the background noise of their perfect universe, and they documented us with the detached curiosity of a biologist studying a peculiar fungus. They cataloged our irrational pack bonding, our unnecessary vocalizations we called music, and, most famously, our primitive percussive maintenance. The thump. To the Vaantheon, it was our defining, endearing flaw. When a plasma conduit stuttered or a grav lift stalled, a human mechanic would be summoned. They would stare at the console, their face a mask of what the Vaantheon archives labeled crude concentration. Then, after a moment, they would make a fist, or use the heel of their hand, and deliver a solid, resonant thump to the machine's casing, and the machine, more often than not, would whir back to life. Overseer Zylock, a being of flawless quartz and condescending intellect, once wrote a widely circulated treatise on the subject. He argued the thump was a placebo ritual, a vestige of our tribal past. The machine's self-repair protocols would have engaged anyway, but our simple minds needed to believe our illogical act of violence was the cause. It was proof, he concluded, of our charming incompetence. Proof that we could never truly comprehend the elegance of their designs. They let us keep our little ritual. It was harmless. It made us feel useful. We were more than useful. We were listening. My name is Ben, and my post was the primary cryopump regulator on Vaantheon Prime. A glorified plumber. For 30 years, I walked the same gantries, surrounded by the quiet hum of technology that was supposed to be beyond my comprehension. My Vaantheon overseer, Unit 734, would watch me work, its crystalline form shimmering under the sterile lights. It would see me pause, tilt my head, and then deliver a firm, calibrated strike to the side of a humming relay. Thump. The relay's frequency would smooth out. The slight tremor in the floor would cease. Unit 734 would note it in its daily log. Human technician applied percussive maintenance. System corrected. Inefficiency noted. What it didn't note was the information I had just gathered. That thump wasn't a repair. It was a question. It was sonar. Every machine in their empire had a rhythm, a resonant frequency. With every illogical strike, we were mapping that rhythm. We were feeling out the machine's soul, finding the precise vibration that could soothe it and the one that could shatter it. The thump was a language, passed down from one generation of janitors to the next, a silent, coded conversation happening in plain sight under the noses of our masters. Each tap was a diagnostic, a report, a whispered promise of rebellion. And today, the conversation ends. Today, we give our answer. I stand now before the central relay, the very heart of Vaantheon Prime's power grid. Unit 734 floats behind me, its internal glow a placid blue. A minor energy fluctuation has been reported, and I have been summoned. The perfect, reliable servant. The conduit flickers human, Unit 734 intones, its voice a series of harmonious chimes. Apply your methodology. I look at the console. My heart is a drum against my ribs, a frantic, chaotic rhythm the Vaantheon could never hope to understand. I can feel it. Across the galaxy, thousands of other hands are resting on thousands of other machines. A century of listening, a century of waiting, a century of being underestimated. It all comes down to this. I raise my hand, not in a fist of anger, but with an open palm. This last one is not for violence. It's for music, the song of our freedom. My palm met the relay's casing. It wasn't a thump, not this time. It was a caress, a final moment of intimacy with the machine I had come to know better than its own makers. Unit 734 chimed, a sound of impatient curiosity. The fluctuation is not correcting, human. Your method appears to be failing. The method isn't failing, I whispered, the words tasting of rust and freedom. It's just beginning. And then I tapped. It was a simple rhythm, one my grandmother had taught me by drumming on my back when I was a child. Tap, tappa, tap, tap, tap. A 5-beat code so common in our old, forgotten music that no Vaantheon algorithm would ever flag it as anything but random noise, the shave and a haircut of our rebellion. The key forged from a century of ridicule. The first tap was a whisper sent into the machine's soul. The second, a confirmation. The third, an order. The last two, the trigger. For a full second, nothing happened. The sterile silence of the gantry remained, broken only by the placid hum of the grid. Unit 734's internal light pulsed a steady, authoritative blue. It began to formulate a statement on the failure of my technique. It never finished the thought. The hum didn't just stop. It was violently ripped from the air. A sound vacuum descended, a deafening silence that was more shocking than any explosion. Then came the scream. It wasn't a human scream, but the sound of a billion perfect circuits frying at once, a shriek of tortured metal and shattered crystal. The sterile white lights overhead didn't just go out. They exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the gantry into a nightmare of strobing emergency strobes. The floor beneath my feet, once solid as a mountain, shuddered and dropped a full foot as the artificial gravity plates failed. I grabbed a railing to steady myself, my knuckles white. My heart sang with terror and triumph. Unit 734 was a kaleidoscope of panic. Its placid blue light convulsed, flashing through a spectrum of colors the Vaantheon reserved for catastrophic system failure. Violet, blood red, a sickly, glitching yellow. Its harmonious chimes became a discordant mess of static and panicked subroutines. Cascade failure imminent, unauthorized access illogical. It turned its crystalline body towards me. For the first time in 100 years, a Vaantheon looked at a human and saw not a servant but a threat. Its focus lens, usually wide with detached analysis, narrowed to a sharp point of pure, unadulterated confusion. You, it chimed, the harmony gone, replaced by a grating screech. What have you done? We knocked, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting around us. For 100 years we knocked. You just never bothered to answer the door. That's when the real music began. From deep within the station's core, a new sound started, a low, grinding groan, the sound of their perfect, elegant technology dying. The doors to the gantry slid open, not with a smooth hiss, but with a tortured squeal, and in the doorway stood Maria, the woman who cleaned the overseer's contemplation chambers, and old Jin, who serviced the waste recyclers. They weren't holding mops or wrenches now. They were holding salvaged plasma cutters and heavy-duty industrial tools, their faces grim, their eyes burning with a light the Vaantheon had never bothered to catalog. The light of purpose. The Uprising had a face, and it was the face of every janitor, every plumber, every servant they had ignored for a century. The background noise was becoming the storm. The foundations of their world were not just cracking, they were being systematically and percussively dismantled. For a being of pure logic, Unit 734 processed the new reality with terrifying speed. The strobing colors of its crystalline form coalesced from panicked chaos into a single, sharp, lethal red. The threat was no longer an anomaly to be analyzed, it was a contagion to be purged. Its multi-jointed appendages, usually employed for delicate data port interface, snapped open to reveal emitters of focused sonic energy. Tools designed to pulverize rock and ore, now aimed at us. Hostile biological agents detected, it chimed, the voice now a flat, deadly monotone. Sanitization protocol initiated. Before it could fire, Maria was already moving. She was 60 years old, with hands wrinkled from a lifetime of scrubbing floors, but she moved with the ferocious grace of a cornered animal. She yanked the nozzle from a nearby wall-mounted cleaning unit and sprayed a thick, viscous fluid directly at Unit 734. It was OmniClean 7, a solvent designed to break down organic residue. The Vaantheon, being silica-based, were normally immune, but Maria had spent years tinkering with the formula in her closet, adding a specific, highly corrosive enzyme she'd cultured from the station's fungus farms. The moment the solvent hit Unit 734's crystalline shell, it hissed, not with heat, but with chemical fury. The perfect polished surface of its body began to craze and fog over, like glass being etched by acid. Its sonic emitter sputtered, firing a wide, uncontrolled blast that shattered a section of the gantry railing and sent shards of metal screaming into the darkness. Jin, meanwhile, had unspooled a high-pressure hose from his own utility cart. "Eat waste, you shiny rock," he yelled, the first defiant human shout I'd heard in 30 years. A torrent of semi-liquid refuse blasted Unit 734, obscuring its sensors and further corroding its damaged shell. The irony was so thick, it was almost poetic. The masters of the galaxy, undone by cleaning supplies and garbage. My own mind was racing. I wasn't a fighter, I was a plumber. But I knew the pipes. I knew the systems. I slammed my hand on a manual override next to me, a big red wheel labeled Cryopump Coolant Flush. The Vaantheon built fail-safes into their fail-safes, but they never imagined someone would activate one in the middle of a perfectly stable system. A deep roar echoed through the pipes. The floor plates frosted over instantly, and a cloud of super-chilled nitrogen vapor billowed out from the vents, enveloping the gesticulating Vaantheon. Its movements became sluggish, its red light dimming as its core temperature plummeted. It was trapped, blinded, and freezing. Just then a voice crackled in my ear, sharp and clear. "Ben, this is Anya. Report." Anya, the quiet woman who coordinated the food distribution rotas. Of course, the logistics chief, the perfect cover. "We have control of the gantry," I managed to say, my breath pluming in the freezing air. "Overseer neutralized." "Neutralized isn't enough, Ben. That was just the alarm clock. The whole building is waking up." Her voice was calm, but steel-hard. "The Vaantheon are attempting a hard reboot of the entire Prime network from the Trinity core. It's an isolated system, triple redundant, buried 50 levels below you. They think we can't touch it." I understood immediately. This chaos we'd unleashed was just a distraction. If they rebooted the network, they'd regain control. They would lock everything down, and our century-long plan would end in a footnote about a failed janitor's riot. "They're wrong," Anya's voice commanded. "The schematics are being downloaded to your data slate now. We need you to get to the Trinity core. You're the only one who has ever made a Vaantheon machine sing a new song. We need you to go down there and teach their most important machine a final lesson." This was it, the point of no return. I looked at Maria, who was reloading her solvent sprayer, and at Jin, who gave me a fierce, toothless grin. I was no longer Ben, the mechanic who had started a riot. Anya's order had just made me a soldier. My mission wasn't just to break things anymore. It was to plunge my hands into the very heart of the enemy and tear it out. The stake wasn't just my life or the lives of my friends. It was the future of our species, wagered on a desperate one-way trip into the most secure facility in the galaxy. "I'm on my way," I said. The war had just begun, and I had just been given my orders. Leaving Maria and Jin to hold the line was one of the hardest things I've ever done. They weren't soldiers, they were grandparents. But as I turned to go, Jin caught my arm. He pressed a heavy metal object into my hand. A Vaantheon kinetic driver, a pneumatic hammer used for anchoring support struts. It was heavy, solid, and utterly primitive. "Every good mechanic needs a good hammer," he said, his grin fierce. "Now go be a good mechanic." That hammer felt more reassuring than any plasma rifle could have. It was a tool of my trade, a part of me. With a final nod, I plunged into the service corridors, my data slate lighting the way. The descent had begun. The Vaantheon's world was designed for elegance and efficiency, not for war. Their corridors were wide, crystalline archways. their transit systems silent magnetic sleds. Our rebellion had turned that elegance into a death trap. As I descended, the signs of our coordinated chaos were everywhere. A mag sled had been derailed, its passenger, a high-ranking Vaantheon administrator, frozen solid from a ruptured cryo-line, its pose one of perpetual, logical surprise. Farther down, I saw the aftermath of a firefight, the walls pockmarked not by plasma bolts, but by thousands of high-velocity ball bearings, fired from a repurposed industrial cleaning system. The janitors of Sector Gamma had apparently weaponized a sandblaster. The irony was a constant, grim companion. For a century, the Vaantheon had given us the keys to their kingdom, never once thinking the janitor might change the locks. We knew every forgotten service hatch, every unmonitored plumbing conduit, every structural weakness. The schematics on my slate were a godsend, but my true map was the 30 years of grime I'd scraped from the station's guts. I knew which tunnels hummed with lethal radiation and which were merely filled with the stench of recycled air. My path wasn't a straight line. It was a tangled web of ladders, catwalks, and claustrophobic maintenance shafts barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through. The silence was unnerving, punctuated by the groan of stressed metal and the distant percussive sounds of fighting. It was a lonely journey, and the weight of Anya's order pressed down on me. I wasn't just a saboteur. I was the tip of the spear. If I failed, the flashes of resistance I was witnessing would be extinguished before they could truly become a fire. On level 34, I ran into my first automated defense. A trio of Vaantheon Purity drones, gleaming silver spheres that patrolled the corridors, scrubbing them clean of microbial contaminants with beams of hard UV light. They weren't weapons, but that light could boil a man's eyeballs in his skull. They cornered me in a junction, their blue lights switching to the now familiar tactical red. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had no plasma cutter, no corrosive solvent. I had a data slate and a big hammer. The drones whirred, calculating the most efficient way to sterilize the biological threat. I was out of options, so I did the only thing a human would do when faced with a problem they couldn't solve. I created a bigger one. I looked up. A massive coolant pipe ran directly overhead, its sides slick with condensation. A memory sparked. A work order from 5 years ago. Junction 34 Gamma. Reroute pipe due to minor seismic instability. Low priority. It was never fixed. I hefted Jin's pneumatic hammer. It felt right in my hands. The drones advanced. I swung the hammer not at them, but at the support strut holding the pipe. The impact was deafening in the enclosed space. The strut groaned, bent, but held. The drones paused, their logic processors trying to understand why the contaminant was attacking the station itself. I swung again. Thump. A crack spiderwebbed across the metal. One more. Thump. With a shriek of tortured metal, the support gave way. A ton of cryogenic pipeline crashed to the floor, rupturing on impact. A wave of liquid nitrogen flash froze the entire corridor, drones included. They were statues of gleaming silver, trapped in poses of lethal intent. Their red lights frozen forever. I stood in the swirling mist, my own suit icing over, alive only because I'd known about a bit of shoddy workmanship from 5 years prior. The Vaantheon saw us as flawed. They never understood that we don't just live with flaws. We master them. We weaponize them. And their perfect, logical world was about to be shattered by a million little imperfections they had been too arrogant to even notice. For 10 levels, the descent was a brutal but predictable rhythm of bypass and sabotage. I fell into a grim routine, check the slate, identify a weak point, create a diversion, and slip past in the ensuing chaos. I disabled surveillance cameras with targeted burst from a pressure hose, shorted out sentry patrols by overloading junction boxes, and navigated the station's bowels like a ghost in their machine. A dangerous, intoxicating confidence began to build in my chest. I was outsmarting them. I was winning. It's an old human failing. To mistake a winning streak for invincibility. The Vaantheon, it turned out, were capable of learning. The encounter happened on level 44, in the cavernous primary ventilation chamber. It was a web of catwalks suspended over a chasm thousands of feet deep, the air humming with the movement of colossal fans. My slate showed a single entity patrolling the area. I planned to do what had worked before, cause a structural failure. A well-placed strike with Jin's hammer on a key support pylon for the main catwalk would send it, and the patrol into the abyss. Simple, primitive, effective. I crept along a service gantry, hammer raised, my target in sight. The patrol was a Vaantheon form, but different, larger. Its crystalline structure wasn't the clear, elegant quartz of the administrators, but a smoky, dark obsidian that seemed to drink the light. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace that set every nerve in my body on fire. I reached the pylon and swung. The hammer connected with a satisfying, resonant thump. But instead of the shriek of stressed metal, there was only a dull, dead thud. A shimmering field of gold energy flared around the pylon, absorbing the kinetic impact completely. My arms vibrated from the dead stop, the hammer nearly flying from my grasp. The dark Vaantheon stopped. It turned its head, its multifaceted eyes focusing on me from 100 yards away. A voice echoed in my head, not through my comms, but directly. A cold, telepathic intrusion. Percussive maintenance. Crude, yet predictable. We have updated our protocols. It wasn't a collection of harmonious chimes. It was the voice of a glacier grinding stone, devoid of emotion, but filled with immense crushing weight. It raised an appendage, and a beam of the same golden energy shot out, not at me, but at the catwalk I was on. The energy didn't destroy it, it reinforced it, locking every bolt and welding every seam with shimmering power. My escape route was now a cage. I am Exarch Kale. My function is to correct systemic errors. You, human, are the primary error. It began to advance, its movements unhurried, impossibly silent. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. This wasn't a drone or an overseer. This was a warrior. This was the Vaantheon's answer to our rebellion. I threw the hammer. A desperate, foolish act. Exarch Kale tilted its head slightly, and the hammer froze in mid-air, caught in a kinetic field, before clattering uselessly to the floor. Your reliance on simple physical force is your core flaw. Your species has the reach of a child, always grabbing, pushing, striking. It was halfway across the main catwalk now. I scrambled backward, my mind a blank wall of terror. I had nothing. No tricks, no solvents, no weak points to exploit. He was a perfect predator in his own environment, and I was just a plumber. My hand slapped against the data slate, my only connection to Anya, my only map. An idea, horrible, suicidal, flashed in my mind. The slate was my most valuable tool, the key to the mission, but it was also a Vaantheon device. There is no escape. The Exarch's voice ground against my consciousness. The anomaly will be purged. You want an anomaly? I yelled, my voice raw. Here's a new one for you. I toggled the slate's power core to overload, a function no sane user would ever touch, and hurled it like a discus toward the chamber's ceiling. The Exarch's attention, for a fraction of a second, followed the object, its logic trying to compute the strategy behind my pointless act. That fraction of a second was all I had. I turned and ran, not toward an exit, but straight off the edge of the gantry, plunging into the darkness of the ventilation chasm. The data slate exploded above me, a blinding flash of light and a pulse of EMP energy that momentarily scrambled the Exarch's senses. As I fell, I saw its silhouette, motionless, a figure of absolute power, its mission only momentarily delayed. I had survived, but I was disarmed, blind, and falling into the heart of the storm. The true war had just begun. Falling is a unique kind of terror. It's a surrender. Your life is no longer in your hands, but in the hands of gravity, and whatever waits at the bottom. The air rushed past me, a roaring hurricane in the dark. The flash from my overloaded slate had faded, leaving me in absolute, profound blackness. I was blind, disarmed, and my only map was now a cloud of vaporized atoms. The voice of Exarch Kale echoed in my consciousness, a contagion to be purged. He was right. I was just a bug, falling to his doom in the guts of a machine I had foolishly tried to fight. This was how it ended, not with a bang, but with a long, lonely drop. All of our planning. A century of whispered rebellion, ending with me, the tip of the spear, becoming a red smear on a fan blade. My body tensed for the inevitable impact. But the impact never came. The fall just continued. And in that endless, terrifying moment, something shifted. Stripped of my sight, of my tools, of my confidence, there was only one thing left. The feeling. The vibration. The song of the station. For 30 years I had diagnosed machines by touching them, by listening to their unique rhythms. My percussive maintenance was never about the strike itself, it was about the feedback. It was a conversation. The thump was my question, the resulting vibration was the answer. Now, falling through the very heart of the station, I was surrounded by the biggest machine of all, and it was screaming. I closed my eyes, though it made no difference in the dark. I stopped fighting the fall and just listened. Not with my ears, but with my whole body. The air rushing past me wasn't just wind, it was a medium, carrying the resonant frequencies of the entire station. I could feel the discordant shriek of overloaded power conduits from the levels above. I could feel the seismic tremor of distant explosions. But beneath it all, deeper and more profound, was a steady, rhythmic pulse. Thump, 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 thump. It was the heartbeat of Vaantheon Prime. The steady, metronomic thrum of the Trinity core. It was the most powerful, most fundamental rhythm in the station. A bass drum that anchored the chaotic symphony of the Uprising. And in that moment, I understood. Anya had given me a map, but my grandmother had given me a compass. I didn't need to see my destination. I could feel it. The core was pulling me in, a source of immense gravitational and sonic energy. This was the revelation. The Vaantheon saw their station as a collection of discrete systems. They would analyze the failure of one part, then another, logically but separately. They couldn't see the whole, but a mechanic, a plumber, knows that it's all connected. The boiler, the pipes, the faucet. An issue in one affects them all. I was the only one who didn't see a machine but a body whose nervous system we had just fried, but whose heart was still beating. My fall was no longer a panicked plummet. It was a controlled descent. I angled my body, using the air currents like rudders. I could feel a colossal updraft from one of the primary fans below. It would slow my fall. I aimed for it, not with sight, but with instinct, feeling my way through the invisible currents of energy. My magnetic boots hit something immense and moving with a solid clang. I had landed on the surface of one of the colossal fan blades, a slab of metal the size of a city bus, turning in a slow, majestic arc. I hadn't conquered the fall. I had learned to ride it. From this new perch, the feeling was even stronger. The pulse of the Trinity core was a tangible thing, a vibration that traveled up through the metal and into the bones of my feet. I no longer had a map, but I had something better. I had a bearing. I looked down into the darkness, in the direction of that steady, powerful beat. I had stopped reacting to the enemy and was now hunting its heart, using a sense they couldn't detect, couldn't comprehend, and could never, ever block. I was no longer falling. I was navigating. Riding the fan blade was like surfing on the back of a sleeping god. It carried me down 5 full levels before I leaped off, landing silently on a deserted service platform. The heartbeat of the Trinity core was stronger here, a palpable thrum that resonated in my teeth. I had a direction. I had a purpose. What I didn't have was a plan for what lay between me and my destination. The lower levels were a different kind of hell. Here, the industrial machinery of the Vaantheon Empire churned and groaned. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and hot metal. The elegant silence of the upper decks was replaced by the cacophony of a factory floor thrown into chaos. It was down here, in the grease and the grime, that the bulk of humanity had been put to work. And it was down here that the rebellion was at its most visceral. I found them on level 52, pinned down behind a barricade of hauling containers. A dozen human workers, men and women I recognized from the mess halls, armed with rivet guns and wielding massive industrial wrenches like battle axes. They were holding off a squad of Vaantheon enforcers, sleeker, faster versions of the Purity drones, armed with pulse cannons that fired bolts of debilitating energy. The humans were fighting with a fury I hadn't witnessed before, but they were losing. Their shots sparked uselessly against the Enforcer's energy shields, and for every drone they managed to disable with a lucky throw or a desperate charge, 2 more would glide forward to take its place. The leader of the group, a tough-as-nails woman named Eva, saw me emerge from the shadows. Her face was smudged with grease and grim resolve. "You're Anya's man? The ghost?" she yelled over the din of battle. "We heard you were coming. We're trying to get our families out of the residential block on the other side of this sector." Just then, my personal comm, a short-range unit built into my suit's collar, crackled to life. It was Anya's voice, faint but clear. "Ben, I'm picking up your signal. Your mission is absolute. The Exarch is moving, hunting. You cannot deviate." The dilemma was a physical blow. Before me were people fighting for their children, their partners. In my ear was the voice of cold, hard strategy, reminding me that those same families would be enslaved or exterminated if I failed to reach the core. The Vaantheon would have seen no choice. The mission objective superseded all other variables. To them, Eva's people were an acceptable loss. For a moment I saw the logic in it, the cold calculus, and it terrified me. I looked at the battlefield. The humans were fighting with brute force. The Enforcers were fighting with perfect tactics. It was a battle of passion versus mathematics, and math was winning. But they were all fighting on the Vaantheon's terms. "Don't fight the drones," I shouted to Eva, an idea sparking, born from the rhythm of the factory around me. "Fight the floor!" She gave me a look of pure confusion. I didn't have time to explain. I pointed to a series of colossal pistons, each the size of a house, pounding a relentless rhythmic beat into the station's foundation. They were sonic compactors, used to settle industrial waste. Their rhythm was so powerful, so fundamental to the sector, that everything else was built to accommodate it. I ran towards the master control panel, the Enforcer's pulse fire searing the air around me. The controls were, of course, a mess of alien glyphs, but I didn't need to read them. I put my palm flat against the panel, closing my eyes, feeling the thrum of the machine. The rhythm was all wrong, a chaotic mess from the Uprising. But the root beat was still there. It needed a new tempo. I used my fists, not Jin's hammer. Thump, 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 thump. I wasn't trying to break it. I was retuning it. I was a DJ in hell, forcing the machine's rhythm into a new, impossibly fast, and utterly unstable beat. The effect was instantaneous. The pistons, which once pounded in a slow, steady rhythm, began to hammer in a frantic, accelerating staccato. The entire sector began to vibrate violently. The Vaantheon Enforcers, designed to operate on a perfectly stable platform, suddenly faltered. Their targeting systems went haywire, unable to compensate for the seismic chaos. Their energy shields flickered as the resonant frequency disrupted their emitters. They became, for a precious few seconds, deaf, dumb, and blind. "Go! Now!" I screamed at Eva. Her fighters didn't hesitate. They surged past the confused drones, dragging their families from the nearby hab block and disappearing down a service corridor. Eva gave me one last look, a mixture of awe and disbelief. The pistons gave one last, titanic shudder before seizing up completely with a groan that shook the station to its core. I had saved them. But the silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. I had just created a sonic earthquake in the heart of the station, a beacon. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that the hunter now knew exactly where I was. The silence that followed the sonic quake was worse than the noise. It was a heavy, listening silence. I didn't need my newfound sense to know he was coming. Every particle of dust in the air seemed to hold its breath. I broke into a run, diving into the labyrinth of pipes and conduits, my only goal to put distance between myself and the sonic beacon I had just lit. The path ahead was a narrow access tunnel, barely shoulder-width across. It was dark, cramped, and my only option. I squeezed inside, the metal scraping against my suit. The heartbeat of the Trinity core was my only guide, a frantic drum urging me onward, deeper. Then the heartbeat in my ears was drowned out by a voice in my head. A futile gesture. You create chaos to mask your movement, but chaos is a pattern I can read. You are a noisy, inefficient creature. The air behind me shimmered. I turned, and my blood ran cold. Exarch Kyle was phasing directly through the solid metal wall of the tunnel, his obsidian form resolving like a ghost of pure, geometric hatred. He hadn't bothered with doors. He had simply decided the wall was no longer an obstacle. My body reacted before my mind could. I scrambled forward, crawling frantically through the tube. A golden beam of energy shot past my head, striking the wall in front of me. It didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist. A perfect circular hole had been erased from reality, opening into the chasm below. A disintegration beam. The Vaantheon weren't just trying to disable us. They had wartime technology we had never dreamed of. I was trapped. He was behind me, and a void was in front of me. The voice returned, laced with something that felt disturbingly like amusement. Correction of the primary error is now inevitable. Cease function. Suddenly, a volley of plasma fire erupted from the tunnel's entrance behind the Exarch. "Get away from him, you damn toaster!" a voice screamed. It was Ava. She and 2 of her fighters had come back. They were firing their salvaged plasma cutters, the bolts of energy splashing harmlessly against the Exarch's shimmering golden shield. It was a suicidal, glorious, humanly stupid act. The Exarch turned slowly, his attention shifting from me to them with dismissive ease. Secondary errors. Your pack bonding is a predictable vulnerability. He didn't even use his beam. He raised a hand, and the metal walls of the tunnel around Eva's team warped and twisted, closing in on them like a fist. One of the fighters was crushed instantly. The other fired wildly before a spike of sharpened metal, pulled from the floor itself, impaled him. Eva stood alone, her plasma cutter sputtering. She looked past the Exarch, her eyes meeting mine. There was no fear in them. Only a blazing, defiant fire. "The ghost has to make it," she said, her voice a ragged whisper, but I heard it clear as day. "For us." Then she did something no Vaantheon could ever compute. She stopped fighting her enemy and targeted her greatest asset. She jammed the nozzle of her cutter into the massive power conduit running alongside the tunnel wall, overloading its safety protocols. "Illogical action," the Exarch noted, a split second before the conduit exploded in a sun-bright flash of raw, unrestrained energy. The blast wave hurled me from the tunnel, my suit screaming with proximity warnings. I landed hard on a platform below, my vision a mess of white spots. When I could see again, the tunnel was gone. A huge, molten crater had been blasted into the side of the level. The Exarch was still there, his obsidian form cracked and pitted, his golden shield flickering weakly. He was damaged, but he was alive. Of Eva and her fighters there was nothing left, not even ash. The stake of this war, the real cost of our rebellion, hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't about machinery or freedom anymore. It was about the faces of the people who die for you. Eva's face, Jin's grin. I had been driven by a century of anger, but for the first time, I felt the sharp, crippling agony of grief. The hunter was wounded, but I was broken. He had taken more than just a map from me now. He had taken a piece of my soul. I didn't run. I crawled. I found a darkened maintenance crawl space, curled into a ball, and for the first time in my life, I felt the true crushing weight of what we had done. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by the hollow ache of grief. Eva's face, illuminated by the flash of her own sacrifice, was burned into the back of my eyelids. Every beat of the Trinity core, which had been my compass, now felt like a funeral drum, counting out the lives we had spent to get this far. The Exarch's voice echoed in my memory. Illogical action. He was right. Eva's sacrifice made no sense from a tactical standpoint. She had traded 3 skilled fighters and a major power conduit for a few scratches on his armor. A terrible trade. A losing trade. Any Vaantheon would calculate it as a failure. And yet, it had saved me. That single, nagging thought was a crack in the wall of my despair. Why did it work? Because the Exarch, for all his processing power, could not assign a value to defiance. He couldn't quantify the strategic advantage of a last, dying no. He saw Eva's action as a bug in her programming, a glitch to be noted before deletion. And that's when the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, not with the cold certainty of logic, but with the burning clarity of revelation. We were the glitch. All of it. Our emotions, our loyalties, our ridiculous hope, our capacity for both creation and self-destruction in the same breath. The Vaantheon saw the universe as a perfect machine. They built flawless systems, elegant and predictable. They conquered us because we were flawed, chaotic, unpredictable. They never realized that in a perfect system, the only thing that can force change is an imperfection. A glitch. A ghost in the machine. Our percussive maintenance was the perfect metaphor. We didn't fix machines by hitting them. We introduced a small, chaotic shock, a momentary glitch, that forced the system to reset its own rigid parameters. We were professional glitch makers. My mission, I realized, was flawed from the start. Anya had told me to destroy the Trinity core, but destroying it was still playing their game. It was a logical, strategic objective. The Exarch would be expecting it. He would be guarding against it. I could never win on his terms. I had to do something he couldn't guard against, something he could never even conceive of. I wasn't going to destroy the core. I was going to give it a soul. I wasn't going to silence the heartbeat. I was going to give it a memory, Eva's memory. I would find the core, and my final, percussive maintenance wouldn't be a code to shut it down. It would be a rhythm that carried the signature of our illogical, beautiful, terrible humanity. I would use the core as a tuning fork and broadcast a new song across their entire network, a virus made of grief. I would infect their perfect logical system with the one thing it had no defense against, a feeling. The despair in my chest didn't vanish. It hardened. It transformed from a crippling weight into a cold, dense fuel. The grief became a weapon. The rage became a targeting system. This was the final human trait, the one they never bothered to document, our ability to turn our pain into purpose. I uncurled my body. The funeral drum of the core was no longer a sound of mourning. It was a beacon. My beacon. I began to move, not crawling in fear, but walking with a grim, steady purpose. I was no longer an engineer or a soldier. I was a vessel. I was the carrier of a plague called humanity, and I was heading for the heart of their world to start an epidemic. The Exarch was hunting a saboteur. He was about to be found by a ghost. The final levels of the descent were eerily quiet. The chaos of the rebellion had not reached this deep. This was hallowed ground, the sanctum sanctorum of the Vaantheon machine. The corridors were no longer metal and grime, but polished, seamless crystal that seemed to hum with contained power. The air was cool, sterile, and thrummed with the deep, resonant beat of the core, now so powerful it felt like a physical pressure against my chest. The entrance to the core chamber was not a door, but an iris of pure light that dilated as I approached. It scanned me, not for identification, but for composition, its systems likely baffled by the cocktail of grief, rage, and resolve that now constituted my being. I stepped through, and my breath caught in my throat. It was a cathedral. A cavernous, perfectly spherical chamber, its walls a seamless obsidian black. In the exact center, suspended by 3 immense beams of shimmering, silent energy, floated the Trinity core. It was a perfect sphere of flawless crystal, the size of a small moon, its internal lattice glowing with the captured light of 1,000 suns. It was the most beautiful, most perfect, most alien thing I had ever seen, the source of all their power, the heart of their perfect, logical world. And standing before it, like a priest of a forgotten violent religion, was Exarch Kale. He was damaged, his obsidian shell scarred and pitted from Eva's final act of defiance. But he stood impossibly still, his presence radiating a cold, patient certainty. He had not hunted me down. He had simply waited for me at the only place that mattered. The glitch arrives. His voice filled my mind, calmer now, heavier. I have analyzed your species' historical data. This pattern is common. When faced with a superior order, you do not seek to understand it. You seek to tear it down, driven by a primal fear of your own obsolescence. You call it freedom. It is merely entropy. He took a step toward me, his movements a symphony of deadly grace. Your rebellion is a fever, a systemic illness. I will be the cure. I thought of Eva's face, of Jin's hammer, of 100 years of being patted on the head for our charming incompetence. The heat in my chest was a supernova. "You see a sickness," I said, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I see a symptom, and you're about to experience a full-blown outbreak." I didn't run at him. I ran to the side, toward one of the 3 colossal energy beams anchoring the core. It hummed with power, a single, perfect, monotonous note. It was the most stable thing in the universe. Time to change its tune. I swung the only weapon I had left, a heavy metal pipe I'd ripped from a wall 2 levels up, and struck the emitter at the base of the beam. Clang! The sound was an obscenity in the sacred silence, a discordant note in the perfect song. The beam flickered. The Trinity core, for the first time in millennia, shifted a millimeter in its suspension field. The Exarch was on me in an instant, faster than I could have believed. His hand, a collection of sharp, crystalline blades, swung at my head. I ducked, and the blades carved a deep gouge in the crystal wall behind me. "Predictable," he stated. "You strike the machine, as is your nature." "You're not listening," I yelled, scrambling away. I wasn't trying to break the emitter. I was playing it. I was turning his cathedral into my drum kit. I ran to the next beam's emitter and struck it. Clang. Another obscene note. The core shuddered more violently. The lights in the chamber flickered. The Exarch lunged again, but this time I was ready. I wasn't watching him. I was listening to the room. I could feel the shift in energy, the subtle change in the air pressure his movement caused. I dove to the side a half-second before his attack landed where I'd been. He paused, his head tilting. "Your reaction time has improved. Illogical. Your biological systems are inferior." "You think I'm fighting you?" I laughed, a raw, ragged sound. "I'm not good enough to fight you. But I'm the best damn plumber in the galaxy. And I know that when you shake the pipes enough, eventually, the whole building comes down." I struck the 3rd emitter. Clang! The 3 dissonant notes now hung in the air, creating a chaotic, vibrating rhythm that fought against the pure hum of the core. The chamber was in chaos. The core was visibly wobbling in its containment field. The Exarch looked from me to the core, his logic processors clearly struggling to prioritize threats. The glitch was spreading. The perfect machine was starting to break. The Exarch stopped trying to attack me. His logic, vast and powerful, had finally processed the true nature of my strategy. I wasn't the target. The system was. He moved to the center of the room, placing himself between me and the wobbling, discordant Trinity core. He began to emit his own frequencies, golden waves of pure, ordered energy, attempting to counteract my chaos, to soothe the screaming machine back into its perfect, placid rhythm. It was a battle of songs. My frantic, angry, percussive death metal against his serene, logical, classical symphony. And he was winning. The chamber's violent shudders began to lessen. The core's chaotic wobbling started to stabilize. His logic was stronger. His control was absolute. "Your chaos is finite," the Exarch's voice stated, a cold finality in the tone. "Order is the natural state of the universe. Your rebellious noise will be silenced." He was right. I was exhausted, my muscles screaming, my borrowed pipe bent and broken. I couldn't keep this up. I had shaken the foundations, but I hadn't broken them. I had one last hope. One final illogical act. I had to touch the core itself. I let the pipe drop with a clatter. I stood, breathing heavily, feigning exhaustion and defeat. "You're right," I gasped, projecting weakness. "It's over." "Affirmative. The error is recognized. Surrender is the only logical outcome." He took a step toward me, his hand raised to deploy a capture field. In his mind, the battle was won. The glitch had been contained. And in that moment of supreme logical arrogance, I grinned. I launched myself at him, not to fight, but to fly. I planted my foot squarely on his armored chest, the last thing he would ever expect, and pushed off with all the strength I had left. It was the most disrespectful, most insane, most human thing I could have possibly done. For a glorious half-second, I used the ultimate warrior of the Vaantheon Empire as my own personal springboard. I sailed through the air, my hand outstretched, my entire being focused on the glowing, crystalline surface of the Trinity core. The energy coming off it was immense, a physical wall of heat and power that seared my suit and my skin. But I didn't pull back. I reached forward, my fingers brushed the surface, and I tapped. It wasn't a code. It wasn't a rhythm of destruction. It was the frantic, stumbling, imperfect beat of my own damn heart. It was the memory of Eva's defiant eyes. It was the sound of Jin's fierce grin. It was the feeling of a century of repressed anger, of grief so sharp it was a physical pain, of a love for my broken, chaotic species so fierce it was a fire in my soul. I pushed all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, into the single point of contact. I gave the perfect machine our perfect imperfection. The result was not an explosion. It was a schism. The pure white light of the core shattered. It did not go dark. It fractured into a billion warring colors, a visual representation of a logic engine trying to compute an emotion. A silent scream ripped through the Vaantheon network, a wave of pure, undiluted feeling. For the first time in their history, the Vaantheon, as one, felt something. They felt the agony of Eva's sacrifice. They felt the terror of the void. They felt the irrational hope of a rebellion born from nothing. Their unity, their greatest strength, became the conduit for a psychic plague. Exarch Kale, who had turned to watch my final, foolish act, froze solid. His internal light didn't just go out. It imploded. His direct link to the network had opened him completely to the tidal wave of my uploaded soul. The perfect warrior, the cure for the human fever, stood as a hollow, crystalline statue, his mind permanently and utterly broken by the sheer, chaotic force of a single human feeling. I was thrown back, my body a wreck, my arm burned to the bone. I collapsed onto the floor, the world fading to gray. The chamber was silent, the core was dark, but as consciousness slipped away, I heard a new sound. Not the hum of machinery or the voice of a god. It was the sound of thousands of human voices, cheering, laughing, and crying over the open comm channels. The song of chaos, the sound of freedom. I woke to the smell of antiseptic and the low murmur of human voices. My arm was a mass of bandages, and the world was a blurry, painful haze. Anya was sitting by my bedside, her face etched with exhaustion and a weary, unfamiliar emotion. Victory. "You did it, Ben," she said, her voice quiet. "You beautiful, crazy son of a bitch, you did it." "Is it over?" I rasped, my throat raw. "Did we win?" Anya's expression was complex, a mixture of triumph and profound uncertainty. "That's the strange part," she began, looking toward a viewport where the stars no longer seemed so cold and distant. "The Vaantheon didn't fall. Their ships didn't explode. Their empire didn't crumble." She paused, searching for the words. "They just stopped. All of them. All at once. Across 1,000 worlds their fleets went silent. Their armies stood down. Their administrators ceased their functions. The great logical hum of their civilization just faded away." In the weeks and months that followed, we began to understand the true scope of what my glitch had accomplished. The Vaantheon network hadn't just crashed, it had become self-aware in the most painful way imaginable. We had force-fed an entire species its first-ever emotion, and it had driven them into a state of collective catatonic shock. They were a species of pure logic wrestling with the paradox of grief. A civilization of gods who had just learned the concept of a soul by having theirs shattered. We called it the Great Silence. Their perfect order was broken, replaced by a profound and galaxy-spanning confusion. Some Vaantheon went insane, their crystalline form shattering under the strain. Most simply became inert, monuments of flawless quartz lost in an inner turmoil they had no language to describe. But a few, a very few, began to change. We would intercept fragmented, hesitant communications from their silent fleets, no longer logical directives, but questions. Why does it hurt? What is the value of a memory? We, the janitors and the plumbers, became the custodians of a broken god. We didn't conquer an empire, we inherited a madhouse. The war for survival was over, But the war for meaning had just begun. Humanity, the flawed and chaotic children, were now faced with the monumental task of teaching their former masters how to feel. I am an old man now. My arm is a web of scar tissue, a permanent reminder of the day I touched a god's heart. I often look at the silent Vaantheon ships that still hang in our sky, no longer symbols of oppression, but of a shared galactic melancholy. We didn't win by becoming like them, by adopting their cold logic and ruthless efficiency. We won by forcing them to become a little more like us, broken, uncertain, and wrestling with the beautiful, terrible burden of a soul. The term percussive maintenance entered the galactic lexicon. It became a legend, a myth whispered in a dozen languages on 100 worlds. It was the story of how the quietest, most overlooked people in the galaxy didn't defeat the all-powerful machine by breaking it. They fixed it. They hit it just right, and gave it the one thing it was missing. They conquered us to cure us of our humanity. Now, they come to us, seeking a cure for their own. And that was the chronicle of how humanity taught a god to feel, one thump at a time. If you enjoyed this journey to the deepest corners of the galaxy, your support is crucial for our stories to continue. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so you don't miss the next transmission. Until next time.